The roar of 3 motorcycles shattered the afternoon calm, their engines echoing ominously off the buildings of a small, quiet town. The Vultures, a notorious biker gang known for their ruthless antics, had arrived. They pushed through the door of the town's beloved diner, their boots stomping heavily on the tile floor, eyes scanning for an easy target. But today, they were in for a surprise. Behind the counter, Mrs. Margaret Evans, a determined 74-year-old, was pouring coffee for her regulars. For decades, she had kept the diner running, her warmth and pies serving as the heart of the community. But today, worry flickered across her face as the bikers sauntered in, their leader, a broad man named Clay, leaning over the counter, his smile menacing. Unknown to Margaret, she wasn't alone. In a back booth sat Evelyn Monroe, a retired Navy SEAL in her mid-60s, a woman with experiences that most people couldn't even fathom. Evelyn had come to this little town in search of peace, hoping for a break from a life filled with high-stakes missions. But the moment she saw Clay lean over the counter, her instincts told her that peace was the last thing she'd find today. Clay's voice broke the silence, cutting through the gentle hum of the diner. "Hey, lady, where's our protection payment? This time, don't be late." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she poured a cup, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, calm and unwavering. "Why don't you leave her alone?" Every head turned towards Evelyn, who sat quietly in her booth, her gaze steady and expression unreadable. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. "And who are you supposed to be, Grandma?" Clay sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. Evelyn's lips curled into a faint smile, her eyes unflinching. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies." If you enjoy stories about unexpected heroes and acts of courage, be sure to comment below where you're tuning in from and subscribe for more tales of bravery and justice. Stick around, because this story is just getting started. Clay was used to seeing fear in people's eyes, especially in a sleepy town like this. He laughed as he swaggered over to Evelyn's booth, his boots hitting the diner floor with a heavy thud. "You think you can stop us, lady?" Clay mocked, leaning down close to Evelyn's face. Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked directly into his eyes, her voice calm but firm. "I think it's best if you leave before things get ugly." Clay blinked, taken aback by her composure. "You've got to be kidding me." He gestured for his 2 henchmen, Moose and Trigger, to move forward. The tension in the room thickened, and the other customers froze, watching in horrified silence. But Evelyn wasn't joking. Years of handling worse threats had prepared her for moments like this. Before Clay could say another word, Evelyn moved. Her hand grabbed his wrist, twisting it with expert precision. Clay cried out, his knees buckling under the sudden pain. "I said, leave," Evelyn repeated, her tone steady and controlled. Moose and Trigger stepped forward, but Evelyn was ready. She shifted, positioning herself between Clay and his men, her stance relaxed but ready for action. Patrons in the diner began to rise, a murmur of support growing among them. "Back off, or you'll regret it," Moose snarled, pulling out a switchblade. Evelyn cocked her head slightly. "You sure you want to do that?" Before Moose could react, Evelyn disarmed him with a swift motion, sending the knife skittering across the floor. The bikers hesitated, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. They had never faced someone like Evelyn before, someone who was not afraid. "You've got one chance," Evelyn said, her voice echoing across the diner. "Take your buddy and get out." Clay, still groaning in pain, nodded. "Let's go," he muttered weakly. The bikers helped Clay to his feet, glaring at Evelyn, but they made no move to retaliate. Within seconds, they were out the door, their motorcycles roaring as they sped away. A moment of stunned silence followed, and then the diner erupted in applause. Margaret stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Evelyn. I don't know what I would have done." Evelyn gave her a gentle smile. "No thanks needed. Just doing what's right." But she knew it wasn't over. Bullies like Clay didn't give up that easily. They would be back, and when they returned, Evelyn would be ready. Later that evening, Margaret insisted that Evelyn stay for dinner. The diner was quiet, the hustle and bustle of the day having settled, and Margaret wanted to express her gratitude. As they sat down to a simple but hearty meal, Margaret couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. "You're not just passing through, are you?" Margaret asked, her voice gentle but probing. Evelyn sighed, her eyes clouding with memories. "No, I guess not. I served in the Navy for over 30 years. I was a SEAL. I've been to places, seen things, done things that still haunt me sometimes. I thought I'd retire and find some quiet. Maybe find a place like this where I could just be." She gestured around the diner, the comforting scent of baked pies filling the air. "Seems like trouble follows me, though." Margaret nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "This town used to be a good, safe place. But ever since those bikers showed up, everything's changed." She paused, her eyes welling up. "No one's brave enough to stand up to them." Evelyn reached across the table, resting her hand on Margaret's. "This place is still good. And the people here, they're stronger than they realize. They just need a little reminder." Margaret smiled, a flicker of hope lighting up her face. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time we take our town back." Margaret got up to refill their coffee cups, her steps a little lighter. She returned with a fresh pot of coffee and 2 slices of apple pie. "You know, I think people would rally behind someone like you, Evelyn. Someone who's not afraid." Evelyn took a sip of her coffee, considering Margaret's words. "It's not about not being afraid. Fear is always there. It's about deciding that some things are worth facing that fear for." She looked out the window, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the empty road outside. "I didn't come here looking for a fight, Margaret. But I won't stand by and watch good people be bullied." Margaret nodded, her expression resolute. "I've lived here my whole life. My parents opened this diner when I was just a kid. It's more than just a business, it's home. And I'm tired of being scared in my own home." Evelyn smiled, a warmth in her eyes. "Then let's start small. We don't need to take them all on at once. We just need to show them that we're not backing down." Margaret's eyes brightened, and she reached for a notepad from the counter. "Maybe we could start by talking to some of the others. I know a few folks who are tired of this too. If we stand together, maybe we have a chance." Evelyn nodded. "That's the spirit. It's about community. People standing up for each other. That's how we win." The 2 women sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were about to undertake settling between them. But it wasn't a heavy weight. It was a hopeful one. Margaret could feel a spark she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose slowly returning. "Evelyn," Margaret said softly, "thank you. For staying. For caring." Evelyn reached for her fork, cutting into the slice of pie. "Thank you for dinner, Margaret. And for reminding me why I came here in the first place." She took a bite, savoring the taste. "It's time we remind everyone else too." Margaret raised her coffee cup in a toast, her eyes meeting Evelyn's. "To taking our town back." Evelyn clinked her mug against Margaret's cup, a determined smile on her face. "To taking it back, one step at a time." The 2 women shared a quiet laugh, the warmth of their shared resolve filling the small diner. The night outside was dark, but inside, there was a light. A hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make things right again. 2 days passed, and the Vultures returned, this time with reinforcements. 10 bikers rode into town, their engines roaring like thunder. The townspeople could hear them coming long before they arrived, their hearts pounding with dread. Evelyn stood in front of the diner, waiting. Word of her previous encounter with the gang had spread, and many of the townspeople had gathered nearby, hiding behind cars and fences, anxious but hopeful. Margaret stood by her side, her hands trembling, but she stood tall, refusing to show fear. Clay dismounted his bike, his face twisted in anger. His arm was still bandaged from his last encounter with Evelyn. "You think you can embarrass me and get away with it, lady?" he shouted as he stepped forward. Evelyn stayed calm, watching as the rest of the gang spread out around her. "I think it's time you leave this town alone," she said, her voice unwavering. Clay let out a harsh laugh. "And who's gonna make me? You?" Evelyn didn't reply. Instead, she looked at the townspeople gathered around. They were scared, but she also saw something else, determination. It was time for them to take a stand. "Everyone here is done with you," Evelyn said, her voice carrying across the street. "This town belongs to them, Not you, Clay snarled, pulling a gun from his belt. Last chance, lady. Move or else. Before he could aim, another voice rang out. Put it down, Clay. It was Sheriff Hayes, standing beside several townspeople, each holding whatever they could find. Bats, shovels, a rusty old crowbar. Sheriff Hayes, who had once been too frightened to intervene, now stood tall, inspired by Evelyn's courage. Clay hesitated, scanning the crowd. He hadn't expected this. His gang shifted, their confidence clearly faltering. Evelyn took a step forward, her gaze fixed on Clay. Bullies win because people let them, she said, her voice calm but firm. But not today. Today, we're standing up. Clay glanced at the faces around him, determined, angry, unafraid. Slowly, he lowered his gun, his bravado fading. Let's get out of here, he barked at his men. They mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life. But their exit was drowned out by the cheers of the townspeople. Margaret turned to Evelyn, tears streaming down her cheeks. We really did it. We stood up. Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride. No, Margaret, you all did it. I just gave you a nudge. The crowd began to gather around Evelyn and Margaret, their fear turning to excitement. People who had once been too afraid to even make eye contact with the bikers now stood tall, some clapping, others cheering, and a few coming up to personally thank Evelyn. Sheriff Hayes approached Evelyn, his eyes filled with gratitude. I should have done this a long time ago, Hayes admitted, his voice cracking. But it took someone like you to remind us all what courage looks like. Evelyn shook his hand, her eyes meeting his. It's never too late to do the right thing, Sheriff. This town needs you. Hayes nodded, determination setting into his face. You've got my word. We're not backing down again. He turned to the townspeople, raising his voice. Listen up, everyone. We're taking our town back, and it starts today. We'll organize, watch out for each other, and make sure these bullies know they're not welcome here. The crowd roared in agreement, a newfound energy buzzing through them. People began talking amongst themselves, forming plans, discussing patrols, and organizing shifts to keep an eye out for trouble. Evelyn watched as a community that had been broken by fear started to come back to life. Margaret squeezed Evelyn's arm, her eyes shining with hope. You've done something incredible here, Evelyn. You've given us our courage back. Evelyn shook her head gently. No, Margaret. The courage was always there. You just needed to see it. She looked around at the people, at their faces filled with hope and determination. This isn't about me. It's about all of you. I'll be here to help, but this is your fight. Your town. Margaret nodded, her smile growing wider. And we're ready to fight for it. As the crowd began to disperse, people exchanging hugs and handshakes, Evelyn felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come to this town looking for peace, but instead, she had found a purpose. These people, who had once been too scared to stand up for themselves, were now ready to defend their home. And that, to Evelyn, was worth everything. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn and Margaret sat on the diner's porch, sipping sweet tea. The streets were quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the calm of a community that had found its strength. Margaret looked over at Evelyn, her expression soft. What do you think will happen now? Will they come back? Evelyn took a long sip of her tea before answering. Maybe. Bullies like that don't always give up easily. But if they do come back, they'll find a town that's ready for them. And they'll realize they're not just facing one person. They're facing all of us. Margaret smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. I think we'll be okay. As long as you're here. Evelyn returned the smile, her gaze drifting to the horizon. As long as this town needs me, I'll be here. But I have a feeling you all are stronger than you think. You won't need me forever. Margaret chuckled. Maybe not. But for now, we're sure glad to have you. Evelyn nodded, the warmth of the moment settling deep within her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And whatever came next, she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. In the weeks that followed, the town seemed to come alive again. The people, once intimidated, now walked with their heads high. They worked together to repair the damage the bikers had caused, fixing broken windows, repainting walls, and sweeping up shattered glass. There was a renewed sense of purpose, a spirit of resilience that hadn't been there before. Evelyn helped where she could, organizing efforts, teaching self-defense classes, and reminding everyone that they had the power to protect what was theirs. Sheriff Hayes, inspired by Evelyn's bravery, began to work closely with the townspeople, creating a neighborhood watch to ensure that no one would ever have to face threats alone again. Margaret's Diner became the heart of the town once more, a place where people gathered not just for coffee and pie, but for planning, for laughter, and for celebrating their newfound courage. The booths were often filled with townspeople discussing patrol schedules, brainstorming ways to improve safety, or simply sharing stories of hope. The diner, which had once been a place of refuge, was now a symbol of their resilience and strength. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Margaret and Evelyn sat on the diner's porch, watching children play in the street, their laughter echoing through the town. Margaret looked at Evelyn, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You gave us back our lives, Evelyn. We'll never forget that." Evelyn smiled, her heart finally at peace. "I didn't do it alone, Margaret. You all found your strength. I just helped you see it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the town seemed to glow with hope. The vultures were gone, but more importantly, the fear they had instilled had vanished too. In its place was a community that knew its worth, a community that had learned to stand together. Sheriff Hayes walked up the porch steps, his face weary but content. "Evening, ladies," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Neighborhood watch is up and running smoothly. Folks are taking shifts, and everyone's chipping in. I've never seen the town so united." Margaret beamed. "It's all thanks to this one here," she said, nodding toward Evelyn. Hayes shook his head. "No, it's thanks to all of us. Evelyn might have sparked it, but everyone here made it happen. We're a team now." Evelyn nodded in agreement. "It's true. This kind of change doesn't come from one person. It takes everyone." Hayes took a seat on the porch railing, his eyes scanning the street as the children's laughter continued. "You know, for a long time, I felt like I'd failed this town," he admitted, his voice low. "I let fear get in the way of doing what was right. But seeing everyone come together like this, it's made me realize that it's never too late to make things right." Margaret reached over and patted his arm. "You're making it right now, Sheriff. That's what matters." Evelyn watched the scene before her, her heart swelling with a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. The town had changed, not because of her, but because of the people who had decided that enough was enough. They had chosen to fight for their home, and they had won. A group of teenagers walked by, waving at Margaret and Evelyn as they passed. One of the boys, tall and lanky, called out, "Hey, Miss Evelyn, when's the next self-defense class?" Evelyn chuckled. "Tomorrow afternoon. Be there, and bring your friends." The boy grinned and gave her a thumbs up before running off to join his friends. Margaret shook her head, laughing softly. "You've become quite the celebrity around here." Evelyn shrugged, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm just glad they're learning to take care of themselves. That's what's important." The sky grew darker, stars beginning to twinkle above. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know, I think we're going to be okay. For the first time in a long time, I really believe that." Evelyn nodded, her eyes also on the stars. "You will be. You've got each other, and that's what makes the difference. No matter what comes, you're not alone." Margaret turned to Evelyn, her expression soft. "What about you? Do you think you'll stick around?" Evelyn hesitated, then smiled. "For a while, I think. There's still work to be done. And besides, I kind of like it here." Margaret laughed. "Well, we're glad to have you. This place wouldn't be the same without you." Evelyn felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. She had come here searching for quiet, for solitude. Instead, she had found something far more meaningful, a place where she could make a difference, a place where she belonged. As the night settled in, the porch light casting a soft glow around them, Evelyn knew that this was the kind of peace she had been searching for all along. Not the silence of isolation, but the warmth of community, of people standing together, united and unafraid. Margaret raised her glass of sweet tea, her eyes meeting Evelyn's. "To new beginnings," she said softly. Evelyn clinked her glass against Margaret's, her smile reaching her eyes. To new beginnings. And as they sat there, watching the town they had fought for begin to thrive once more, Evelyn knew that this was just the start of something beautiful. A community reborn, stronger and more united than ever before.